tia kaka nigi mako cha ogoye poko giko ni kata joma nodong mang'eny mane wang'eyo notho koro ebe naluso na ne chunyo dhi mane koro ebo ne kicho kacha kanene gi wanga.
Nilipata nikistuka kwamba watu walikuwa wamenishika na wakanirepu. Nao watu hata sikuwajua. Nilikosa fahamu kabisa.
Walikuwa ni wanajeshi, wamevaa nguo zinafanana. Hata wakaniacha na mimba. Wakaniacha na ugonjwa.
Following Kenya's general election in December 2007, there was a lot of tensions around who the winner was. And essentially the result was disputed of the presidential vote. And that led to a lot of tensions which ultimately broke up into violence. There was damage to property, but most importantly, there was actually direct attack to individuals based on what was perceived to be either their political or ethnic affiliation.
There was rape, there was attempted rape, there was defilement of minors, there was attempted defilement, there was gang rape. There was also deliberate transmission of the HIV virus or other communicable disease or sexually transmitted diseases. And also there was forced pregnancies. There was also forced circumcisions on men, and there was penile amputations.
Ma mungiki all kagimanyo tribes moko kaka Joluo mondo gigo odok thuchegi kuma giaye. Negiting'o pangas, moko ting'o rungus, arrows and grinders gine. Korka circumcision notim nago be negi lonya duk kasto gichako tugo gi duong'na moko diyo temu ginene tugo diyo kitariyogo kama goyo then moro biro gi wembe to ng'adogo.
Poko mayiro mokalo kanochopo Desemba tarik 28 emane lwenyno opo ka Desemba kane jona poka jomoko sieko joma nang'egi to gilewni mag negi rwako uniform machalo mag polise. Alicho chwado badani ana sechwado notor kabisa. Bas cosa chota gora pe. Tukachaka chuma film na nen to puka ili maka gitela kamoro bas ni kau beti ngado ko dum na kinyange ya ngada gibeti.
The experiences are all valid, they are all awful, and there are very, very many of them. In Kibera, we had a woman who suffered 2 separate incidences of gang rape.
Wakati jeshi waliingia, walianza kunilalulia nguo na wakanibaka. Wakati walitoka hivi, raia nao wakarudi wakaingia, wakatubaka na wakanibebea kila kitu kwa nyumba. Nikakaa hapo ndio hakuna pahali ningeweza kupitia. After 3 days ndio tulipata pahali ya kupita, ambapo walinichukua wakanipeleka Amref wakasema hawataweza wanipeleke Mbagathi.
What violations went on around their reproductive and sexual rights? They were not able to access treatment.
During the Working Commission, there were close to 47 to 50 women who came forward and talked about the violations that they went through. And what was really sad was that perhaps close to 95% were not able to access any form of care because of the environment in which this occurred.
Most of the roads were blocked, the roads were barricaded, and it was very difficult for people to access this hospital.
The facilities were abandoned by the health workers because some of them came from the ethnic groups that had the problem. So they left the facilities, and therefore there were no personnel to man any of the victims.
Subsequently, later is when survivors now came in. There was sexual violence and physical violence. Some got HIV infection, and there are others who got post-traumatic stress disorder and other complications in the reproductive health system because the delay, especially infections.
Nilikuwa karibu na mtoni. Sasa wakanirepu. Kulikuwa wanaume zaidi ya 5. Sasa mimi niliogopa, but hizo rumors ziliendelea ati Susan amerepiwa. Si kwenda huko hospitali, niliogopa kwa sababu hapa ni nyumbani.
Now, if somebody is so afraid of what other people might think of what they know, they stay home. That means they're unable to visit the hospital in the required, 72-hour period. They are unwilling to go to the police station because they worry, what if the community finds out? If I go to the hospital, if I go to the police, it means that I was actually raped. So that really does factor in the follow-up for reporting. In areas where they were forcibly displaced, of course, they were running for refuge. Their priority at that time was not seeking medical assistance or even making the report. At the time, they're trying to find out, where do I get a tent for me and my children to sleep in? Where do I get food? Where do I get a blanket? How do I get out of here? How do I go back to my area whereby I know I will be secure?
Nyinga Nancy Anyango Chieng, auso yien, awang'o maka, apuro, hotel bende, atiyo tich hotel, matin. Naivasha, estate miluongo ni Kyoto, Rift Valley Village. To kane wan Kyoto, kane gik Sunday saa 7, 2007. Acha kane jok osedonjo. Kech bende gin jok moko malich moyugno. Ni gin gi dreads. Ka gisedonjo to king'e ni koro iringi ng'iyo kama inyalo konyori. To donjo e ot. To ka donjo e ot ma muna loro dhoot to ng'ato osegweya. To nyisa ni nyinyi wajaluo nyinyi ndio mnasumbua watu hapa. Tapo ka ng'ato osepama to ng'at machielo gweyo nding'a tagora piny. Koro kama agora piny ni to ji ariyo maka nanga to yiecho. Kose yiecho to kae emonyisa ni ukicheza tunakuua. To ng'at achiel oseketo betika. Koro onge gima nanyalo timo. Koro kama nindeno, koro ng'at achiel okuongo orepa motieko. Then ng'at machielo chako donjo. Ng'at mar adek koro ing'eni giinga koro mucha koro rumo kama antiere kani. Bang' ndalo 2 no tadhi osiptal gi ndalo, koro ndalo 5. Ka gisemiyowa counseling, ne gipimo HIV. Kane gisepimo mano ne gipimo nyach. Korka tuo nikech ne giwacho ni kaluwore gi kaka ne joka kodonjo kuoma mang'eny, mfuku ne gihinyo. Koro mfuku na ne bet ne gi shida. Koro dwani yud yo minyalo yudo godo kaka inyalo thiedhi mondo manyi yo kata kidhi Homa Bay nikech jogi hapa ni machine magech go ne gionge kata Kisumu mondo dhi opima maber. To nikech na onge pesa kata nyaka sani pok adhi mondo dhi opim iya no POP.
There was a general system failure in the sense that we were not prepared. The country was not prepared for, first of all, the magnitude of violence, and second, the magnitude of sexual violence. So even in places where there were facilities, they had the regular amount of supplies. So you'll find that they did run out of supplies, materials, and equipment. They did run out of the necessary urgent therapy, for instance, that was required. So all that confounded the lack of access, really, to healthcare.
The public hospitals are in conflict-prone areas. They didn't provide any form of treatment. We have really tried getting statistics from public hospitals where there was full-blown conflict, especially in the Rift Valley, the slum areas in Kibera, in Kisumu. We don't have that information. That means that they weren't providing. The only substantial hospital which really tried to assist these victims in terms of medical treatment for the violence that was meted on them is the Nairobi Women's Hospital and the Gender Violence Recovery Center at Kenyatta National Hospital. The plight of the people who are sexually violated, it was never really brought out. Concentration was more on properties which have been destroyed, people moving from one area to another, becoming internally displaced persons as such. So no one really talked about sexual and gender-based violence at that time. And you find that in instances where victims of sexual and gender-based violence went and reported, a little was done because the police officers who are manning respective police stations will normally tell them that this is not very serious. We have other serious cases. We have people who have died. We have properties which have been destroyed. So whatever you are talking about is not really serious. And that means that relevant documentations which would have helped in the prosecution of their cases, or even in terms of giving statistics, wasn't availed by the police officers.
There are other women who said, how do I go and report to a police officer that I have been raped by another police officer? There are others who also said that they were uncomfortable that they had to be questioned by another man, a male doctor, when they could only think about the horror of what had been committed by another man.
SGBV is deemed one of the quote-unquote dirty crimes, and people don't like talking about it. In the Kenyan culture, sex or any conversations about sex are bottom shelf drawer. They don't like the word sex. So when you put a connotation of violence in itself, just because there is an understanding that it violates somebody's dignity and their bodily integrity, it is a taboo to speak about it.
Our society is more patriarchal, and if you look at situations where women have been raped in this country, most of the men or the society tends to view them generally, even fellow women will tend to view them generally as having predisposed themselves to factors which led to the kind of violence that they have suffered. So there is a lot of social stigma. For men, it's even worse, and some of them have not been accepted back into society fully. Support from the family members is not there, and they really have to undergo a lot.
Daktari walimwambia, na vile alichukua, yani ni kama alikuwa confused, akakuwa na uoga, akakuwa ni kama hata sijui, na hata ndio mpaka saa hii tuseme hiyo mambo ya huko ndani sana sikui nayo sana, juu huko ni kama iliharibika. Hiyo ndio maana hata nimesema nimempatia uhuru, kama anaweza wa mwingine juu mimi siwezi kumzuia.
Umejua unaweza kuwa tu unasikia hiyo raha kama hapo iko sawa vizuri, lakini kama iko sasa hakuna haja.
Kursa chemo ko kan kadwa timo gi jodo gine ne tono ko kanyal tiyo maber. Ya ma jodo seche moko yanya godo. Onge gima nyalo timo kuma ka nindo mos. Mana neno ga kedo wich kuot nikech ok anyal tiyo maber. Kaka ne jogo oko ginano ketho. Koro korka kitanda awinje pek be. Koro sirni akwaga jaoda ni kik onyis ng'ata ng'ata. Ore obede e kindwa nikech ok onego ya nyidire oko, lweta ong'ol kendo korka china be. Koro atemo ga hoyo bede wadaga daga. To kik otem golo siri no oko ne ji. Nyalo medo yanya zaidi.
Wakati alienda kushughulika na maisha yake na akaniambia, wewe shughulika na maisha yake kwako. Hakuna venye naweza ishi mimi na mwanamke amebakwa na dunia mzima.
A lot of the survivors feel really helpless and they blame themselves and a sense of guilt. And even in the process of counseling, we usually start by telling them that's not your mistake, it's not your fault. Others is just a sense of stigma and depression and suicidal ideas or ideation, and a sense of feeling worthless and helpless, and that you're nobody, you're dirty.
Kinasigalle kamanai komamwoi lagok kora ale chi nekyanyoru en timin. Ale chi nekyanyoru ne sang oli komasich lakwani. Mami chi nekinai kele kiba timin. Mateb chechang ne ngele aibus koikoite lagok sisich lagok komaibu neo ne. Kiteb kabisa kolyon kou matanyalu yai tuguk cheu chu. Ale ara kilyon bahati mbaya. Amun kokoekitu chun kokomuige koni komamining makai kiwecha nasari ngunon amun kaweke nasari kokonyo kalen kiamiti nasari.
Aneno nikech kata chieng' moro penja ni mama dawa moro ni malo kuno luonge ni mae Mungiki, koro penja ni mama ang'o miyo jogi luonga ni Mungiki kamotineno. Naduoke ni kaka noriembwa oko kuchocho kane wan Naivasha. Koro ne emomiyo ne giwacho ni magi jok manogo gi Mungiki oriembi. Koro kaka an amin gi gima kamano kato penjo to ok anyal nyise nikech nyalo miyo nyathi pache dhi mabor. Koro nyise mana ni kane waa oko to thoth ji luongo mana ni Mungiki. Koro ok di nyise ni an nobedo kama emanomiyo nyuoli. Nyathi chacha be ka nang'iyo ndalo moko taduoga wacho ni mae gimokelo na shida. Ma ndalo moko aduoga wacho ni yawa ka mae shida manyalo bedo en adera kosatim na.
They need long-term counseling. First of all, just to get their self-worth back again and to stop blaming themselves again. They really do have psychological problems, and depending on each individual, some are more prolonged than others, and depending on how soon they were able to access care and support.
Perhaps we should always ask this question to men. Would you raise the child of another man knowing that that child is a product of rape? If you find difficulty answering it, then perhaps the issue of abortion is something that we have to look at from that point of view. Whereas the Constitution says that where the life of a mother is at risk, then that will be allowed. But when you imagine that women go through depression, not just at that time, but thereafter. There is a lady we were working with, and even after the baby was born, they were just calling the baby, baby, because they had no idea what name they could give that child, particularly because within their own community or culture, children are named based on seasons and occasions. And this child was as a result of rape. She was having problems accepting that child. The biggest challenge or weakness that we have is for people to understand what it means to be raped. And you cannot be able to understand that until you start sitting down and putting yourself in those women and men's shoes, or listening to the lives, the stories of those women before, during, and after. It is only at that point that one can be able to start comprehending why certain decisions are made by the women in certain ways.
Kenya, we have made milestones. And the best part of it is the Constitution, whereby it is clearly stated that reproductive health is a human right.
The fact that sexual violence is being talked about, that is a big win. Health policy did not prioritize sexual violence. So now it is on the agenda. The fact that there is a bill in Parliament, the Sexual and Reproductive Health Bill, just being discussed, and being discussed not just by men and women, but even by faith leaders, even by educationists. It means that the issue has actually been recognized as a societal issue and not just a women's issue. In the past, anything that was sexual and reproductive was thought to belong to the maternity, to babies and giving birth. But now it's actually become an issue that is being seen, goes beyond and affects the population in a much larger and wider way than was previously thought. So for me, that's I think, the biggest win.
The bill talks about the different reproductive health issues. It talks about maternal health care. It talks about setting up service centers where women will be able to get services, not just those who have delivered, but even those who have gone through rape or sexual violence. There is a gender rescue center that was actually launched last year in Kisumu, and it provides a one-stop shop.
We've been having a lot of cases of sexual gender-based violence, and we've been having issues, survivors walking from police station, hospital, courts, and everything. So it was decided by the Gender Technical Working Group that we needed to establish a gender-based recovery center so that we could have a one-stop center where all the issues of sexual gender-based violence could be done at one spot. You will find that at the center, we have a clinician there, we have a police officer there to take statements, we have a laboratory technician to do the lab tests, we have a pharmacist who will give medication, and we have a paralegal sitting there to start now the procedures of court. Everything here is done for free. There's nothing that a client pays.
72 hours are very critical. When they arrive here, we want to check whether they may get pregnant, that is if they are in the reproductive age. And so if they are, what we do is we give them what we call postnatal 2, or what people commonly call morning after. This one prevents them from getting pregnant. In those 72 hours, we want to prevent them from getting HIV. And therefore, what we do is we give what we call PEP, post-exposure prophylaxis.
Sometimes mothers bring their children and they are referred to come back to the clinic. And some of them live very far away. Coming back to the clinic becomes a problem.
One major challenge is funding. Much of the funding that goes into reproductive and sexual health is donor related. It's partners who are taking up all these activities with minimal supply from government. There is need for high advocacy so that the government can put in more money in ensuring that the sexual reproductive health is funded and ensured in all facilities and in fact within the population itself. A lot of research and the documents have talked a lot about the attitude of health workers and how they contribute to failure to utilization of services. The government has been working very hard on attitudinal changes and behavior changes among health workers. And today, if you visit the facilities, you will notice the difference, that especially in maternal health and reproductive health, the health workers are becoming more friendly and more oriented towards customer care.
We have ratified international instruments that talk about, sexual and reproductive health rights and the need for state parties to be able to commit, not just in terms of resources, but in ensuring that there's accessibility, there is quality, there is availability. And if you look at the MDGs that we signed, very clear in terms of the issues of reproductive health. But now, to be able to transform those documents into real reality is where you need to have the right people in the right offices. But I think when you bring services closer, one of the things that takes effect is the whole monitoring. You start making sure that you can audit the sort of service that is being provided. It means that you're also able to report complaints a little closer. You don't have to do it in Nairobi. So you help to make services efficient because there's a constant feedback mechanism. And then on top of that, you're able to then determine priority issues in terms of health for that particular region or that particular county. And I think that devolution would be the best way to go.
Quite a better part of the population in Kenya, they actually live below poverty line. If you look at the patterns of or the reported cases of sexual and gender-based violence, they really occur in those slums, they really occur in those rural areas, not in middle-income families and not in upper-income families.
There is a culture of impunity, essentially that, because there is an enabling environment such that perpetrators of violence know that they can perpetrate sexual and gender-based violence and not face any repercussions. Because when you look at conviction rates for sexual and gender-based violence cases, they're pretty low.
Sio miaka ni mingi. Serikali silijua vile tuliathirika. Sio mambo ya kuambiwa, ni kitu ambayo waliona na macho yao. Hiyo wakati mtu kama Raila tulikuwa eneo lake, ndiye mbunge wetu. Tukamuuliza vile anaweza akatusaidia. Alituuliza swali simple sana. Wanaume wangefanya kazi gani?
We're in court right now. Some of the victim petitioners were violated by state security agents. So we need to know what the government has done. And that's the question we're asking because we've not been given any information about that. Essentially, the government has never acknowledged that even if it was stated in the Waki Commission, they've never come out and acknowledged that this actually happened and this is what we've done to punish the people who perpetrated such crimes. There was discrimination because certain classes of post-election violence victims have received some form of assistance. Internally displaced persons. What does that mean? Does it mean that being violated such that somebody takes away my dignity and violates my bodily integrity is a lesser offense from somebody destroying my property and forcing me to leave my home? That's the choice the government has essentially made. And I want to ask the question, and that's why we are all there asking the question, these organizations and the petitioners, why the discrimination? If they can get some form of assistance, why not us? They need help and they need it now.
It is important that we don't forget what's happened. And in the absence of government recognition, we have got to make sure that we at least acknowledge what happened to them by capturing it. That memorialization can also help to heal, because then you say, at least somebody somewhere wrote about what I went through, and that the world knows that this is what I went through. Justice in this country is a very difficult concept to be able to get. We talk about accountability. We talk about the importance of getting it, but nobody's ever prepared for the length of time it takes. And then with time, even for the women, they stop appreciating its value because it has taken so long. If you imagine that we're dealing with victims of 2007, 2008, it is now 2014. And even institutions that filed court cases, their cases have not been finalized. And so the need to be able to have faster accountability is important. And so we need to start speaking with the judicial systems, the courts, to find out how we can ensure that SGBV cases can be fast forwarded, because the nature demands that we must be able to give people closure.
Manuto hope mara ni dichimura chiel haki biro nwang'ore kendo ngimana biro duogo e wang'e kaka ne en chon. But okang'e ni ma biro kawo ndalo marom nade.
Ile mi kit nekiabwoti ale mi kit netot nyokotoreto serikali, kimabwoti kiabawirtoi kityo ale ketebi en amani. Kiame amani kityo.